My name is Edward of Canterbury, and I have lived 23 years since the day I watched a saint die. I am a monk still, though my hands shake when I light the candles in the cathedral. I cannot stand near the northwest transept without feeling the cold sweat of terror return. The pilgrims come in their thousands now, kneeling where Thomas fell, pressing their faces to the stones still marked with his sacred blood. They ask me sometimes if I was here, if I saw it happen. I tell them yes, but I do not tell them everything. I do not tell them how I hid like a coward in the shadows. I do not tell them the smell of blood and brain matter mixing with incense, or the wet sound of steel splitting bone, or the way his brains glistened white and red on the pavement stones in the candlelight. These things are not for pilgrims seeking miracles. These things are mine alone to carry. But I was there. God help me, I was there, and I saw it all. I was 18 years old in the winter of 1170, a novice monk who had taken his vows only the year before. Canterbury was my whole world. The stone walls of the cloister, the rhythm of the offices, the scratch of quill on parchment in the scriptorium, the taste of black bread and weak ale in the refectory. We lived by the rule of St. Benedict. Prayer 8 times daily, manual labor, study, silence. My life was ordered, predictable, safe, or so I believed. The outside world came to us in whispers and rumors, carried by travelers and messengers who passed through our gates. We heard of wars and politics, of King Henry and his disputes with our Archbishop, but these seemed distant things, problems for greater men than we. I copied gospels and sang psalms. I scrubbed floors and tended the herb garden. I was learning to be invisible, as a good monk should be. Thomas Becket was not invisible. He could not be, even if he had wished it. He was our Archbishop, and before that, he had been the King's Chancellor, Henry's closest friend, they said, his hunting companion and advisor. But something had changed when Thomas was made Archbishop of Canterbury. In the year 1162, the man who had lived in silks and furs began to wear a hair shirt beneath his vestments. The man who had feasted with kings began to fast and give alms. The man who had served the crown began to serve the church. This did not please King Henry. I did not understand the details then. I was too young, too new to the monastery, too absorbed in learning. But the older monks spoke of it in hushed voices during our brief recreation hours, walking the cloister paths. There were disputes over money, over lands, over the rights of the church. But the greatest dispute was over what they called criminus clerks, priests and monks who committed crimes. The king wanted them tried in his courts. Archbishop Thomas said no, that clergy must be judged by church courts alone, that the church must remain independent of royal power. It seemed a small thing to me then. Now I know better. Now I know that men will kill over such principles, that blood can be spilled over words on parchment, that a king's anger is a terrible and deadly thing. The dispute grew worse. In the year 1164, there was a great council at Clarendon, where the king presented his customs, his demands really, written down for all to see. Archbishop Thomas refused to accept them, would not seal his name to anything that compromised the church's ancient liberties. The king raged. Thomas fled to France, into exile, and we did not see our archbishop for 6 long years. During those years of exile, the whispers reached us even in our quiet cloister. Archbishop Thomas had excommunicated the bishops who sided with the king. He had written letters to the Pope, condemning Henry's interference in church affairs. He had become, the rumors said, even more austere, even more devoted to his prayers and penances. Some said he was a saint in the making. Others said he was a stubborn fool who would bring ruin on us all. I did not know what to think. I prayed for peace. We all did. In June of 1170, we heard that King Henry had crowned his eldest son as junior king. A great ceremony at Westminster, they said, with feasting and celebrations. But Archbishop Thomas had not performed the coronation. That honor had gone to Roger of York, the Archbishop's rival. This was an insult, a deliberate slight against Canterbury's ancient right to crown the kings of England. When word came that Thomas was returning from exile that December, the older monks were afraid. I asked Brother William, who had been at Canterbury for 30 years, what we should expect. He looked at me with sad, knowing eyes and said only this: "Pray, boy, pray that wiser heads prevail." But wiser heads did not prevail. Archbishop Thomas returned to England on the first day of December, landing at Sandwich. He made his way to Canterbury, and the people greeted him like a hero, lining the roads, calling out blessings. He rode through the city gates on a grey horse, his face gaunt from fasting, his eyes burning with purpose. I was in the crowd of monks who welcomed him at the cathedral doors. He looked at us, looked through us, really, and I felt the intensity of his conviction like a physical force. This was not a man who would bend. This was not a man who would compromise. This was a man who had chosen his path and would walk it to whatever end God decreed. Within days of his return, Archbishop Thomas excommunicated his enemies again. Roger of York, the Bishop of London, the Bishop of Salisbury, all those who had participated in the young king's coronation without him. The documents were read aloud in chapter, and I heard the terrible words: "Let them be anathema, cut off from the body of Christ, denied the sacraments, condemned to outer darkness, unless they repent." Excommunication was no small thing. It meant damnation, unless absolution could be obtained. It meant being cast out from the church, from salvation itself. The monks whispered that this would bring the king's wrath down upon us. They whispered that Thomas had gone too far. They whispered, but they did not say these things aloud, for to question the archbishop was to question our obedience to the church, and we had vowed obedience above all things. Christmas came, cold and grey. We celebrated the feast with solemn masses, the cathedral filled with candles and the smell of incense, the chants echoing in the stone vaults. Archbishop Thomas presided over the services, his voice clear and strong. On Christmas Day, he preached a sermon that frightened me. He spoke of martyrs, of Saint Stephen who was stoned to death for his faith, of the apostles who died rather than deny Christ. He spoke as a man who knew his death was coming. I remember the exact words, for they burned themselves into my mind. "We have had one martyr in Thomas of Canterbury already." He meant the old archbishop, who had died in exile. "And perhaps, God willing, we shall soon have another." The congregation murmured. I felt ice in my belly. Surely he did not mean, surely he was speaking in metaphor, in the language of spiritual struggle. But Archbishop Thomas smiled when he said it, a strange, peaceful smile, and I knew he meant exactly what he said. 4 days later, on the 29th of December, the nights came. It was afternoon, the short winter day already dimming toward dusk. We were preparing for vespers, the evening office when we sang psalms and prayers as darkness fell. I was in the cathedral, lighting candles along the north aisle, my task as a junior monk. The great building was quiet, the stone cold, the air heavy with the smell of old incense and melting wax. I heard shouting from the direction of the Archbishop's palace, which adjoined the cathedral through a covered passage. Raised voices, the clang of metal, running footsteps. My heart began to pound. Brother William appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Armed men," he whispered, "in the palace. They are demanding to see the Archbishop." We were not supposed to interfere in such matters, but curiosity and fear drove me toward the passage. I stayed in the shadows. I was good at being invisible, remember, and I saw them. 4 knights in chainmail hauberks that hung to their knees, the links catching the light from the torches. They wore conical helmets and carried swords at their belts. Their faces were flushed with cold and anger. They smelled of horse sweat and winter air, that sharp metallic scent of armor and hard riding. They had burst into the Archbishop's chamber where he was dining with his clerks and household. I could see through the half-open door, could hear their voices, harsh and demanding. One of them, I would learn later his name was Reginald Fitzurse, was shouting at Archbishop Thomas, who sat calmly at his table, his meal barely touched. "You must absolve the bishops," Fitzurse said. "You must lift the excommunication. The king demands it. You have created chaos and disorder, and it must end." Archbishop Thomas looked at him with those burning eyes and said very quietly, "I will not." Another knight stepped forward, William de Tracy, thick-necked and red-faced. "My Lord Archbishop, you do not understand the gravity of your position. The king is furious. You have defied him at every turn. You have returned from exile only to cause more trouble. Absolve the bishops or what?" Thomas interrupted. "Will you threaten me? I am Archbishop of this see by the grace of God and the Pope."
"I do not answer to the king in matters of the church. I cannot and will not absolve men who have violated Canterbury's ancient rights. They must appeal to Rome if they wish absolution from me." The knights looked at each other. I saw something pass between them, some wordless decision. The third knight, Hugh de Morville, spoke for the first time. "You are a traitor to the crown. You defy your king and foster rebellion. We have come to arrest you in the king's name."
"Arrest me?" Thomas stood, and despite being unarmed and unarmored, despite facing 4 armed men, he seemed to tower over them. "You have no authority here. This is a house of God. I am a consecrated archbishop. You will not lay hands on me." Fitzurse stepped closer. "We have the king's authority. We have traveled from Normandy on his orders. He has had enough of your stubborn pride." I heard Thomas laugh then, a bitter sound. The king's orders? Did Henry say explicitly to arrest me, to harm me? Or did he merely rage and complain, as he has done for years, and you 4 have decided to interpret his anger as permission for violence? The knights said nothing to that, and in their silence, I heard the truth. There had been no direct order. There had been only the king's fury. "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" The rumors said he had shouted, and these 4 had taken it upon themselves to be the ones who would rid him. They were zealots in service to the crown, as Thomas was a zealot in service to the church, and neither side would bend. The confrontation in the chamber grew more heated. Voices rose. I heard furniture scraping on stone, the sound of shoving. Then suddenly, the knights turned and stormed out, and I pressed myself against the wall as they passed, their armor clanking, their breath coming hard. One of them, Richard Brito, was muttering, "We will return. We will finish this." I should have run then. I should have fled to the dormitory, locked myself in, hidden under my pallet. But I was frozen, my legs weak, my mind reeling. Armed knights had threatened the Archbishop, in his own palace, in a house of God. What was happening? What would come next? Brother William grabbed my arm. "Vespers," he hissed. "We must continue with Vespers. The office must be observed." So we went to the cathedral, we monks, filing in for the evening prayers as we did every day, as we had done for hundreds of years. The routine was comforting, familiar. We took our places in the choir, the great stone pillars rising around us, the vaulted ceiling lost in shadow above. The candles flickered. Someone began the opening psalm, and our voices rose in chant. Deus, in adiutorium, meum intend. O God, come to my assistance. O Lord, make haste to help me. How prophetic those words would prove. We were halfway through the first psalm when Archbishop Thomas appeared, striding through the passage from the palace. His clerks were with him, urging him to hurry, to bar the doors, to take refuge. He ignored them. He walked to the altar with that same calm purpose I had seen before, as if he was simply coming to pray, as if 4 armed knights had not just threatened his life. The cathedral doors were still open. We had not yet locked them for the night office. We never did until after Vespers. And then I heard it, the sound of running feet on stone, the clank of armor, harsh breathing. The knights had returned. They had gone to arm themselves more fully, to gather their weapons, to steel their courage for what they meant to do. And now they were coming into the cathedral, into the sacred space, swords drawn. The chanting faltered, stopped. Monks scattered, some fleeing to side chapels, others freezing in place. I did what I do best. I vanished into the shadows behind the altar, pressing myself into the narrow space between a stone pillar and the wall. From there, I could see everything. I wish to God I could not. The knights burst into the northwest transept, the area near the altar where we stood. 4 men in mail, their faces visible now in the candlelight. Fitzurse, de Tracy, de Morville, Brito. Their swords were drawn, long straight blades that caught the light. One of them carried an axe. They looked around wildly, and then they saw Thomas standing near a pillar, between the altar and the stairs that led down to the crypt. He had not run. He had not hidden. He stood there, waiting for them, his hands at his sides. "Where is Thomas Becket, traitor to the king?" Fitzurse shouted. It was theatre, I realized later. They knew exactly where he was. They were performing for history, for witnesses, creating a justification for what they were about to do. Thomas looked at them calmly. "I am here, no traitor to the king, but a priest of God. What do you want?" "Absolve the bishops. Come with us to the king. Submit to his justice." "I will not." Fitzurse moved forward, grabbed Thomas by the arm, tried to pull him toward the door. And then Thomas did something that sealed his fate. He shoved Fitzurse backward, hard, and shouted, "Touch me not, Reginald. You are my man. You owe me fealty. You are a pander and a pimp." It was an insult, calling a knight such names. It was defiance in the face of armed force. It was the act of a man who had chosen martyrdom over compromise. Fitzurse's face went dark with rage. "I owe you nothing, you traitor!" He raised his sword. One of Thomas's clerks, a man named Edward Grimm, who I knew slightly, stepped forward to shield the Archbishop. "No!" he cried. "This is holy ground. You cannot!" The sword fell. Fitzurse brought it down on Thomas's head, a glancing blow that struck Grimm's arm first, cutting through flesh, then catching the Archbishop's skull. Blood sprayed, dark and vivid in the candlelight. I heard Thomas cry out, not in fear, but in what sounded like triumph. "For the name of Jesus and the protection of the Church, I am ready to embrace death." Grimm staggered back, clutching his wounded arm, blood streaming between his fingers. The other knights moved in. De Tracy swung his sword, a powerful blow that struck Thomas on the head, cutting deep. The Archbishop swayed but did not fall. He sank to his knees, his hands clasped in prayer, his lips moving silently. Another blow from de Morville, or perhaps Brito, I could not tell. They were all striking now, a frenzy of violence. Steel rang on stone as one sword broke against the pavement. Blood was everywhere, splashing on the knight's mail, pooling on the floor, spattering the walls. And still Thomas prayed, his voice a whisper, "Into thy hands, O Lord." The final blow came from Brito, a massive strike that split Thomas's skull completely, cutting through bone and brain. The Archbishop collapsed, falling forward onto the stones. And then, God help me, I can still see it, a fifth man stepped forward, not a knight, but a clerk in their service, a man whose name I never learned. He placed his foot on Thomas's neck and ground his sword into the wound, scattering the Archbishop's brains across the pavement. White and red, brains and blood, glistening in the candlelight like some obscene offering. The smell hit me then, copper and iron, the hot metallic stench of blood mixing with the sweet smoke of incense. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from vomiting, from crying out. The clerk who had delivered that final desecration stepped back and said, almost conversationally, "He will rise no more. Let us go." And they went, the 4 knights and their men, walking out of the cathedral as if they had just completed some routine task, leaving the body of the Archbishop of Canterbury lying in a spreading pool of blood before the altar where I hid, shaking, too terrified to move or speak or even breathe. The silence after they left was worse than the violence. For a long moment, nothing, no sound at all except the hiss and sputter of the candles and my own ragged breathing. The cathedral felt enormous and empty, the shadows pressing in. I could not make myself move. I stared at the body lying on the stones, at the dark pool spreading around it, at the way the candlelight caught the edges of the wound where the skull had been split open. This could not be real. This could not have happened. Archbishops did not die like this, butchered in their own cathedrals by armed knights. Men did not kill priests on holy ground, but they had. I had just watched them do it. My mind kept circling that fact, unable to accept it, unable to process what I had witnessed. Slowly,
Other monks began to emerge from their hiding places. They came creeping out of side chapels, from behind pillars, from the crypt stairs. Their faces were white with shock, their eyes wide.
Brother William appeared at my side. I had not heard him approach, and pulled me out from behind the altar. "Come," he whispered. We must attend to him." Attend to him. Yes, that was what monks did, wasn't it? We attended to the dead. We prepared bodies for burial. We prayed for souls. Except this was not just anybody. This was our Archbishop, murdered before our eyes while we cowered and hid. We moved toward Thomas, like men in a dream, our feet slow and uncertain on the blood-slicked stones. Edward Grimm was still there, sitting against a pillar, clutching his wounded arm. Blood soaked his sleeve, dripped onto the floor. His face was grey with pain and shock, but he was trying to speak, trying to tell us what had happened, as if we had not all seen it with our own eyes.
"They killed him,"
Grimm said, his voice shaking.
"They murdered the Archbishop, in the cathedral, on holy ground. They...
His voice broke, and he began to weep. One of the older monks, Brother Osbert, knelt beside Thomas's body. His hands trembled as he reached out to touch the Archbishop's shoulder. "My lord," he whispered, as if Thomas might still answer. "My lord, can you hear me?" But Thomas was beyond hearing. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and the terrible wound in his skull. I forced myself to look at it properly. The wound was deep and fatal. No man could survive such an injury. The top of his head was nearly severed. Brain matter had spilled out, mixed with blood and bone fragments. The clerk's final desecration had left nothing intact. I felt bile rise in my throat. I turned away, stumbling toward one of the pillars, and vomited onto the stones. When I had finished, shaking and ashamed, I looked up to find Brother William watching me with pity. "First time seeing violent death?" he asked quietly. I nodded, unable to speak. "It never becomes easier," he said. "Pray God you never have to see it again." But he was wrong about that. The image of Thomas's split skull, of his brain scattered on the pavement, of the blood pooling in the gaps between the stones, that image would replay in my mind every night for years. I would see it when I closed my eyes. I would see it when I looked at the northwest transept. I would see it in my dreams, over and over, until I thought I might go mad from the seeing. More monks gathered. Someone brought clean cloths and water. We began, hesitantly, to clean the body, to gather the scattered matter. God forgive me for saying it plainly, but we gathered pieces of brain and skull and placed them back as best we could. It was horrible, sacred work. Brother Osbert wept as he worked, praying aloud in Latin, his voice cracking. Others joined in the prayers, and soon the cathedral was filled with the sound of weeping monks chanting the office of the dead. Grimm was taken away to have his arm tended. The wound was deep, I heard later, cutting through muscle, but he would survive. He would write an account of what he had seen, what he had suffered trying to protect the Archbishop. His testimony would become one of the foundational texts of Thomas's martyrdom. But in that moment, he was just a wounded man being led away by brothers who did not know if he would live or die. As we worked, people began to arrive. Townspeople who had heard the commotion, servants from the palace, monks from other religious houses in the city. Word was spreading like fire. The Archbishop is dead, murdered by the king's knights, killed in the cathedral. The crowd grew. Some wept. Some stood in stunned silence. Some began to speak of miracles even then, of how Thomas had died like a martyr, like St. Stephen stoned for his faith, like the apostles who had refused to deny Christ. I wanted to scream at them. There had been no glory in this death, no divine light, no angels descending. There had been only blood and violence, swords and splitting bone, and a man dying on cold stones while monks hid in the shadows. But I said nothing. I was 18 years old, a novice, nobody. What did my horror matter against the tide of devotion already beginning to rise? We carried Thomas's body to the high altar. and laid it there, covering it with a clean pall. Someone found his vestments. The blood-soaked outer robes were removed, and we dressed him in clean ones. Beneath his archbishop's garments, we discovered something that astonished everyone. Thomas had been wearing a hair shirt next to his skin, a rough garment woven from coarse hair that would chafe and irritate, a tool of penance and mortification. He was a saint, Brother Osbert breathed. Look, he wore the hair shirt like the ancient fathers. He was preparing himself for martyrdom. The crowd murmured in wonder. I looked at the hair shirt and felt only sadness. Thomas had been torturing himself, punishing his flesh, living in discomfort and pain, even as he fought his battles with the king. Had he been seeking holiness, or had he been driven by guilt, by some deep need to prove his worthiness after his years of luxury as chancellor? I would never know. The man himself was dead, and the living would interpret his choices however they wished. The night was long and strange. Monks kept vigil by the body, praying in shifts. I took my turn, kneeling on the cold stones, trying to focus on the Latin words of the Psalms, but my mind kept wandering. I kept replaying the violence, kept seeing the swords fall, kept hearing Thomas's voice. For the name of Jesus and the protection of the Church, I am ready to embrace death. Had he truly been ready? Or had that been bravado, the last defiance of a proud man who would not bow even when bowing might have saved his life? I wanted to believe he had been brave, that he had died with perfect faith and no fear. But I remembered the blood, the smell, the terrible sounds, and I wondered if any man could face such an end without terror. Near dawn, we heard that the knights had fled. They had barricaded themselves in the palace for a few hours, apparently uncertain what to do after the murder. But then they had taken horses and ridden away into the darkness. Fled where? To Normandy, someone said, to face the king and report what they had done. Or fled to seek sanctuary, to escape the consequences of killing an archbishop on holy ground. Consequences. Yes, there would be consequences. Even I, young and naive as I was, understood that. You could not murder an Archbishop of Canterbury and expect the world to simply continue as before. The Church would respond. The Pope would respond. And what of King Henry? What would he do when he learned that his angry words had been taken as permission for murder? We would find out soon enough. But first, we had to survive the immediate aftermath. The townspeople were growing agitated. By morning, crowds filled the cathedral, pressing close to see the body, to touch the stones where Thomas had fallen, to dip cloths in his blood. They were already treating him as a saint, as a martyr, and the monks who tried to maintain order were overwhelmed. Brother William pulled me aside. "We need to protect the body," he said. "And we need to document everything. The Church will want a full account. Who was here? What was said? Exactly what happened. Can you write?" "Yes," I said. I had been trained in the scriptorium, had a clear hand for copying manuscripts. "Good. Start now. Write down everything you remember while it is still fresh. Every detail, Edward. This is history. This matters." So I went to the scriptorium and took up quill and parchment, and I began to write. My hands shook so badly that the first lines were nearly illegible, but I forced myself to continue. I wrote about the night's arrival, about the confrontation in the palace, about the chase into the cathedral. I wrote about the swords falling, about Edward Grimm's wounded arm, about the clerk who had scattered Thomas's brains across the pavement. I wrote about the blood and the screaming and the prayers. I wrote until my hand cramped and the winter light filled the windows, and still I was not finished. There was too much to tell, too much horror and detail and terrible clarity. When I finally set down the quill, I had several pages of close script, a testimony to murder. Brother William read it and nodded grimly. "Keep this safe," he said. "Copies will be made. This will be sent to Rome, to Canterbury's daughter houses, to anyone who needs to know the truth of what happened here." The truth. I wondered then, as I wonder now, whose truth I had written. I had recorded what I saw, but I had not recorded my fear, my shame at hiding, my confusion about whether Thomas had been brave or simply stubborn. I had not recorded my doubts about whether this death was martyrdom or the inevitable end of a conflict between two proud men who would not compromise. I had written the facts. The interpretation, the meaning, would be decided by others. The days that followed were chaotic. Pilgrims began arriving almost immediately, flooding the city, seeking to pray at the site of the martyrdom. Miracles were reported. A blind woman who regained her sight after touching the blood-stained stones. A paralyzed man who walked after praying at the altar where Thomas died. A child cured of fever by water mixed with the martyr's blood. I did not see these miracles myself. I heard about them second-hand, stories spreading through the crowds, growing more elaborate with each telling. Were they real? I wanted to believe they were. I wanted to believe that some good could come from that terrible death, that God could bring healing from such violence. But I was not certain. Miracles or mass hysteria, divine intervention or desperate hope. I was too young, too traumatized, too confused to know. The church moved quickly. Commissioners arrived from Rome to investigate the murder, to take testimony, to determine what had happened and who was responsible. I gave my account, standing before stern-faced prelates who asked sharp questions. What exactly did the knights say? Did the Archbishop resist arrest? Did he provoke them? Was there any justification for what they did? I answered as honestly as I could, but I could tell they were already shaping the narrative, deciding what version of events would be recorded in official documents. Thomas would be presented as a martyr who died defending the church's liberties against royal tyranny. The knights would be cast as villains, murderers who violated sacred space and spilled innocent blood. And King Henry? That was the delicate question. Had Henry ordered the murder, or had he merely spoken angry words that zealous knights misinterpreted? The investigators were careful on this point. Kings were dangerous to accuse. Kingdoms hung in the balance. In the end, they crafted a careful answer. The knights had acted on their own initiative, misunderstanding the king's intent, but Henry bore responsibility for creating the conditions that led to murder. He would need to make amends. He would need to do penance, but he would not be formally condemned as a murderer himself. Months passed. Winter turned to spring, spring to summer. We buried Thomas in the crypt, in a tomb that immediately became a site of pilgrimage. I avoided it when I could, unable to face the crowds of fervent believers who knelt and wept and begged for the saints' intercession. I knew they were sincere in their devotion, but I could not share it. When I looked at the tomb, I saw only the blood on the pavement, heard only the wet sound of steel splitting bone. In February of 1173, Pope Alexander III canonized Thomas Becket as a saint and martyr. The news reached Canterbury with great celebration, bells ringing, crowds cheering, monks singing Te Deum in the cathedral. Saint Thomas of Canterbury, they called him now. Protector of the church, defender of liberty, martyr for the faith. A shrine was built over his tomb, decorated with gold and jewels, gifts from grateful pilgrims who credited him with healing and miracles. Canterbury became one of the great pilgrimage sites of Christendom, drawing thousands upon thousands of visitors each year. The city grew rich on the trade that followed: inns and alehouses, sellers of badges and tokens, guides who led pilgrims through the cathedral and told them stories of the saint's life and death. I watched it all with a strange sense of detachment, as if I were observing events in a foreign country, disconnected from the reality I had experienced. This official version of history, the glorious martyrdom, the saintly archbishop, the miracle-working tomb, bore little resemblance to the brutal, chaotic, terrifying murder I had witnessed. Both were true, I suppose. Thomas had died for his principles, refusing to compromise on the church's independence, even when compromise might have saved his life. That was admirable, perhaps even holy, but he had also died screaming, bleeding, his skull split open, his brains scattered by a clerk's boot. That was the reality I could not forget, no matter how many pilgrims knelt at his shrine. The knights, I heard, had fled to Scotland, then to Rome to seek absolution from the Pope. They were given harsh penances, years of crusade in the Holy Land, fighting the Saracens, seeking redemption for their crime through violence in a different cause. Some said William de Tracy died in the East, never returning. Others said Hugh de Morville lasted only a few years before disease or battle claimed him. Reginald Fitzurse supposedly made it back to Europe, but lived as an outcast, shunned by society, dying alone and unmourned. I never learned their ultimate fates with certainty. They disappeared into history, their names remembered only as the murderers of a saint. And King Henry? That is the strangest part of the story. In July of 1174, nearly 4 years after Thomas's death, Henry came to Canterbury to do public penance. I was there. I saw it all. The king arrived on a grey summer morning, riding slowly toward the city with a small retinue. Word had spread that he was coming, and crowds lined the roads, silent and watchful. This was not a royal progress, not a triumphant entry. This was something else entirely, a public act of humiliation, of contrition, designed to reconcile Henry with the church and cleanse him of the stain of Thomas's blood. I stood among the monks gathered outside the cathedral as Henry dismounted from his horse. He was 51 years old then, still vigorous but marked by years of war and governance. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed. He wore a simple pilgrim's cloak over his royal garments, and he walked barefoot through the streets, treading on the rough cobblestones, his feet soon bleeding from the journey. The crowds watched in stunned silence as the King of England, the most powerful man in the realm, made his way like a common penitent to the cathedral doors. At the entrance, he knelt, right there on the threshold, in the dirt, before God and all witnesses. King Henry knelt and bowed his head. "I come seeking forgiveness," he said, his voice carrying across the plaza. "I come to make amends for the death of Archbishop Thomas, who was murdered by men who believed they acted in my interest. I did not order his death, but I spoke words in anger that led to it, and for that I am grievously sorry. I submit myself to the judgment of the Church and seek reconciliation with God and St. Thomas." It was a carefully worded statement, I realized. Henry admitted responsibility without admitting direct guilt. He had not ordered the murder, but he accepted that his words had inspired it. He was sorry, but not quite confessing to a crime. Still, for a king to kneel publicly and ask forgiveness was extraordinary. The politics of it were complex. Henry needed the church's support, needed to end the scandal of Thomas's murder, needed to restore his reputation. But watching him there, barefoot and kneeling, I thought I saw genuine remorse in his face. Perhaps he truly had loved Thomas once, back when they were friends. Perhaps he truly mourned the loss, regretted the words spoken in anger, wished he could undo what had been done. Or perhaps it was all theatre, a calculated performance designed to achieve political ends. I would never know the truth of Henry's heart. The monks led him into the cathedral, down to the crypt where Thomas's tomb stood. Henry descended the stairs, still barefoot, still in his pilgrim's cloak, and he knelt before the tomb. He prayed there for hours, we were told, weeping, begging the saint's intercession. And then came the strangest part of all. Henry stripped off his cloak and shirt, baring his back, and submitted himself to be flogged by the monks. Yes, flogged, scourged, as penance for his role in Thomas's death. The prior and senior monks each took turns with a rod, striking the king's back while he knelt before the tomb. Not hard enough to cause serious injury, I think, but hard enough to draw blood, to leave marks, to demonstrate true penance. I was not in the crypt for that part. Junior monks like me were kept outside, maintaining order among the pilgrims who crowded the cathedral. But I heard about it afterward, heard the whispers of astonishment. The king was flogged. He bled for his sins. He submitted to the church's discipline. It was unprecedented. It was shocking. It was exactly the kind of public spectacle that would cement Thomas's status as a martyr and saint. If the king himself acknowledged guilt and did penance, then Thomas must truly have been holy, must truly have been right to resist royal power. The logic was inescapable. When Henry emerged from the crypt hours later, he looked exhausted, his face pale, his movements slow. He had spent the entire day and night in prayer and penance. He had given rich gifts to the cathedral, gold and jewels for the shrine, lands and privileges for the monastery. He had promised to support crusades to the Holy Land and to abolish certain customs that Thomas had opposed. And then he rode away, back to his kingdom, to the business of ruling, leaving Canterbury enriched and his own reputation somewhat restored. The pilgrims who had witnessed it spread the word far and wide. The king repented. The saint's power was so great that even kings must bow before it. And the number of pilgrims increased even more, flooding the city, filling the cathedral, kneeling at the shrine where Thomas lay. I remained at Canterbury, continuing my life as a monk, but I was changed. The innocent boy who had lit candles for vespers on that December evening in 1170 was gone, replaced by someone older, harder, more cynical. I performed my duties faithfully. I sang the offices, copied manuscripts, served in the refectory, but part of me was always standing in the shadows behind the altar, watching swords fall, hearing screams, smelling blood. Brother William noticed, I think. He sometimes gave me tasks that kept me away from the shrine, away from the northwest transept where Thomas had died. He never asked me directly if I was troubled, but he showed small kindnesses, and I was grateful. Years passed, a decade, then two. I grew from a young monk into a middle-aged one, my hair graying, my joints stiffening, my eyes weakening so that I needed more light to read the manuscripts I copied. The monastery thrived on the wealth brought by pilgrims. We built a magnificent new shrine, even more elaborate than the first, encrusted with gold and precious stones, a glittering monument to St. Thomas. Kings and beggars alike came to kneel there, to pray for healing, to give thanks for miracles, to seek the saints' intercession. I watched them come and go, these thousands upon thousands of pilgrims, and I wondered what they saw when they looked at the shrine. Did they see a holy place where God's power was manifest? Did they see a symbol of the Church's triumph over worldly power? Did they see hope, healing, a connection to the divine? I saw a tomb. I saw the final resting place of a man who had been my archbishop, who had died violently while I hid in fear. I saw the place where blood had pooled on stones, where brains had been scattered, where knights had committed murder and walked away. Both visions were true, I suppose. The shrine was holy, and it was also the site of terrible violence. Thomas was a saint, and he was also a stubborn man who had refused to compromise. The murder was martyrdom, and it was also a political assassination born of royal anger and knightly zealotry. History is like that, I have learned. It contains multitudes, contradictions, competing truths that somehow coexist. The pilgrims who came to Canterbury saw the truth they needed, the miracle-working saint, the defender of church liberty, the holy martyr. I saw a different truth, the human cost, the blood price, the trauma that no amount of gold and jewels could erase. Both truths mattered. In 1198, I heard that King Henry had died. He was 65 years old, still ruling, still fighting wars, still maneuvering for power. He had outlived Thomas by nearly 3 decades. But in the end, death claimed him too, as it claims all men, kings and beggars alike. I prayed for his soul, as I was supposed to. I wondered if he and Thomas had been reconciled in whatever realm lay beyond death, if they had found peace together, if the bitter conflicts of their earthly lives had dissolved into forgiveness and understanding. I hoped so. God knows there had been enough hatred and violence in life. Let there at least be peace in death. The older I grew, the more the memories haunted me. I dreamed of that December evening again and again, the knights bursting in, the swords falling, the blood spreading across the stones. I woke gasping, my heart pounding, reaching for the comfort of prayer, but finding only emptiness. Brother William, now very old himself, found me one night in the cloister, walking off the terror of another nightmare. He sat with me in the darkness, and after a long silence, he spoke. "You carry a burden, Edward. I have seen it in you since that day. You think you should have done something, stopped them, fought them, died with Thomas." I nodded, unable to speak. "You were 18, William said gently. "Unarmed, untrained, a novice monk. 4 knights in mail with drawn swords. What could you have done?" "Something," I whispered. "Anything, not just hide." "You survived," William said. "You bore witness. You wrote down what you saw. That was your role, Edward. Not to die uselessly, but to remember, to record, to tell the truth of what happened. That was your service to Thomas and to God." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that my cowardice had been transformed into something useful, that my survival had purpose. But the shame remained, a constant ache that no amount of prayer could fully ease. As I write this now, I am 41 years old, the same age Thomas was when he died. I have lived as long as he did, spent all those years in this monastery, serving God as best I know how. And I am finally ready to set down the full truth of what I witnessed. Not the official version written for church commissioners, but the raw, honest, terrible account of murder in a cathedral. I do this not for history, though historians may read it. I do this for myself, to purge the poison of memory, to make peace with what I saw and what I failed to do. Thomas Becket was murdered on the 29th of December, 1170, in Canterbury Cathedral, by 4 knights who believed they were serving their king. He died defending the church's independence from royal control, refusing to compromise even when compromise might have saved his life. He was brave and stubborn, holy and prideful, a martyr and a man. The church made him a saint, and pilgrims worship at his shrine, and miracles are attributed to his intercession. All of this is true, and also true. He died screaming, his skull split open, his brains scattered on cold stone, while monks like me hid in the shadows and did nothing. The violence was real, the blood was real, the terror was real. No amount of gold on his shrine can change that. No number of miracles can undo the horror of that evening. I have spent my life trying to reconcile these truths, the holy and the horrible, the sacred and the brutal. I do not know if I have succeeded. I know only that I was there, that I saw it happen, that I have carried this burden for 23 years and will carry it until my own death. When that day comes, and I know it will come, as it came for Thomas, as it came for Henry, as it comes for all men, I hope to find peace. I hope to stand before God and be judged not for my cowardice, but for my honesty. I hope to see Thomas again, not as the golden saint of pilgrims' devotion, but as the man he was, flawed and human and real. And I hope he will forgive me for hiding, for failing to stand with him, for surviving when he did not. Until then, I will continue my life as a monk. I will sing the offices and copy manuscripts and serve in silence. I will avoid the shrine when I can, and when I cannot, I will kneel there with the pilgrims and pray, not for miracles, but for the strength to carry my memories, for the grace to speak truth, for the mercy to forgive myself. Thomas Becket died for his principles. I lived with mine. I do not know which required more courage. The shrine still stands, as magnificent as ever. The pilgrims still come, seeking healing and hope. The stories of miracles still spread, growing with each telling. And the church still holds up Thomas as the perfect example of a prelate who defended holy liberty against secular tyranny, who chose death over compromise, who became a saint through martyrdom. This is the official history, the version that will be remembered. But there is another history too, the one I carry, the one written in blood on stones, the one that knows the price of sainthood is measured in trauma and grief and terrible violence. Both histories are true. I have learned to live with that paradox, to hold both the horror and the holiness in my mind at once, to accept that God works through human weakness and brutality as much as through human strength and nobility. I do not understand it. I never will. I know only that on the 29th of December, 1170, I watched my Archbishop die, and nothing was ever the same again. Not for me, not for Canterbury, not for the Church, not for England. They call it martyrdom. I call it murder. Both words are true. Both wounds remain. And now, having set down this account as fully and honestly as I can, I return it to silence. Let those who read it make of it what they will. Let them see the saint or the man, the glory or the horror, the triumph or the tragedy. I have told what I saw, what I felt, what I carry. That is all any witness can do. My name is Edward of Canterbury. I was there when Thomas Becket died. I have lived with that knowledge for 23 years. And when my own death comes, I will take these memories with me into whatever realm awaits. Memories of blood and brains on cathedral stones, of knights with swords, of a proud archbishop who would not bend, of a young monk who hid in the shadows and survived to bear witness. May God have mercy on us all, on Thomas who died, on Henry who spoke in anger, on the knights who killed, on the monks who hid, on the pilgrims who pray, on the church that makes saints from such terrible raw materials. May God have mercy. Amen. The fire burns low. The voice falls silent. Rest now. The history remains.